All right. In our opening statements on the show this morning, we talked about changes in climatic conditions and how these things affect our daily lives, our planning, and the kind of things we do. And sometime last week, we also saw a series of collapse building incidents in different parts of the country, though not in Anambra. But we wouldn't want those things to happen to us before we take actions. And that's why this morning we want to look at the topic Anambra and Sustainable Environment Initiative.
Yes, and today we have with us in the studios to tackle every question and get to enlighten us more on the moves of the government towards environment in Anambra State. We have with us the Commissioner for Environment, Ecology and Beautification, Architect Michael Okonkwo. So you're welcome to Weekend Show.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. And as usual, we begin with our discussions, but you can also contribute by calling the phone lines on your screen, ask questions, and make contributions in our discussions this morning.
I'd like to start way back. So before this government, let me start. Let me put it this way. The government of Governor Willie Obiano initiated ACTA, that's the Awka Capital Territory Development Initiative. Now, ACTA made a lot of changed the face of Awka town. Recently, we've not had any case of any collapsed building in Anambra State, but we had a lot of cases like that in Lagos State. And you are an architect. Do you think that collapsed building has anything to do with the government, or does it just have something to do with just the architect? Does the government have any role to play in ensuring that there are no cases of collapsed building?
Yes, the menace of building collapses, the causes of it, the effects of it, and actually the remedies that should be put in place is a collective thing. Okay. It encompasses the professionals, the clients, and then, of course, the government. In the case of, let me even start with the client. First, you have to understand that before you build, you have to get the proper people in place, and that takes us to the professionals. And then the professionals themselves have to adhere to the standard practices that has to do with putting up buildings. And then the government comes. The government has the fiduciary duty to give permits, enforce regulations, and make sure that things are done proper. So it's at the least a tripartite thing for this thing to work. But it actually has to do with everybody to get it going.
Okay, it has to do with everybody. Let's look at the policies of government in that direction. Okay. She mentioned, I don't think in recent years we've had that in Anambra. What did the government do actually to achieve that? Okay,
great question. When His Excellency Chief Dr. Willie Obiano came into taking the helm of the administration of Anambra State government, he quickly instituted an investigative body that had to look into this collapsed building menace, because before he came in, it was rather rampant. And that collapsed building committee consisted of people from the different, segments of the professionals: architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, town planners, and the rest. So at the end, they came up with a white paper which advised the government what they found, and then made recommendations. And of course, His Excellency, being the prudent man that he is, made sure that these recommendations were being put in place. The white paper found that people were not adhering to the standard practices. And then that, when I say people, actually it cuts across the board, from the client to the professionals, and then, of course, some lapses in the government angle of it. So the governor changed some of the people in the government and rejigged some of the agencies to make sure that this happened. And that's why you were talking about Awka Capital Territory Development Authority, whose job it is to make sure that development within the Awka Capital Territory is made based on world standard practices. Then you have Anambra State Physical Planning Board that used to be called ASU-DEB. And in fact, that name connoted all kinds of things that the governor didn't like. So that body was changed to Anambra State Physical Planning Board by changing the structure, changing the professionals, bringing people that actually worked. And then there is an introduction, or there was an introduction of a very important aspect in this whole thing, which is called materials testing. Materials testing lab was established under His Excellency Chief Dr. Willie Obiano in 2014. The lab's main job is to test materials because we found, or rather the committee that investigated found that some of the building collapses were caused by the use of substandard materials, inadequate understanding of the artisans on how to use these materials. So the materials testing lab job is to make sure that the materials that are being used in construction are standard materials. So they test these materials, they go out in the market, test them, certify them, and let the builders know where to get the standard ones.
And yeah. The material testing lab, have they been effective?
Very, very effective. In fact, like I said, when I was the managing director of Awka Capital Territory Development Authority, I made sure that we worked in synergy with Physical Planning Board and Materials Testing Lab. Material Testing Lab usually also go to the building sites to make sure that the materials are tested even at the site. And then old buildings, before people did alterations, the buildings and the structural elements of it were tested to make sure that it will still stand.
Because that issue of old buildings is one of the most important aspects of this issue. When you look at that, some buildings maybe have overstayed their welcome or carry more loads than it should, or it was planned initially to carry. How do you handle that aspect of buildings?
Okay, so at Awka Capital Territory Development Authority, of course, we instituted what we called building recertification. You know, sometimes we went around and made sure, or looked at buildings, and, you know, when we find them to be wanting, we instituted recertification, and that meant getting the material testing lab to actually test the components of the structural elements to make sure that they're still sound. But more importantly, change of use. You know, people take a warehouse and try to convert it into a plaza without getting the proper professionals or even the permits to do it. Sometimes the foundation, or in fact, the worst one that we found that people do, you build a bungalow, all of a sudden you're putting some floors on top of it. Now, forgetting that the bungalow had a different type of foundation. And perhaps the soil was not tested, because sometimes you are not required to do testing of the soil for bungalow building. But if you're rising, you must test the soil to be sure that it has the capacity to carry. So, you know, this whole thing is people not adhering to standard practices.
So most times when the government takes drastic measures of pulling down buildings, before then, what are the measures the government put in place to ensure that these people are warned? Because according to the Itafaji incident, the government said they've actually issued warning to the owners of that building for more than 13 times. Now, what are the moves governments make to ensure that these people who own the building that is about to be pulled down leave or vacate the building?
Okay, you just, touched on the very, very important aspect of this whole thing. There was a time in the beginning of this administration, sometime in 2015, a building was marked for demolition. It was a 5-story building. It was demolished. But when it came to review, His Excellency frowned at that. I mean, how do you allow a building to grow that much before you bring it down? So he gave an executive order that all the agencies that are saddled with making sure that buildings are inspected, make sure that the buildings are being built properly, we have to do what we call periodic and stage inspections. You inspect them at point of actually moving to site, clearing, doing the foundation, and then putting the DPC level before you start rising. And at every level, we are supposed to inspect. And then at every level, or at each level, if you find that things are not being done right, you stop them there. Now, that is easier said than done. The practices of our people, unfortunately, a lot of people aim to cheat. I used to even have to personally drive around during the weekends to seek out people who construct at night. They construct during the weekends when the government is not watching. Yeah. I'm telling you, you stop them on Friday. By the time you come on Monday, they've gotten to a point where then you start to get public sentiments. When you try to push it down, people are saying, oh my God, why, this is somebody's investment. That also brings me to another thing. We are always appealing to people because you may think that this is not your problem or this is not your business. When you see somebody constructing illegally, some of these things are very visible. You see that this thing is not working right. If you see something, say something. Call the authorities because it's your neighborhood. When it collapses, you don't know if it's going to fall onto your property, somebody else's property, or people who are going to occupy it would actually or may actually be your relative. So I think people should understand that this is a collective thing that we should all combat.
All right, so I'd like us to go to the topic. What are some of the moves governments of Anambra State have made in order to sustain our environment?
Okay, so the environment, again, is...
I think we should focus more on flood because there is climatic change.
Yes.
And we have this confused weather.
Okay, so I was actually just going to say that it's good that you started with, whichever way you start, but that we touched on collapsed buildings because all these things are part of, if you don't do them right, they contribute to non-healthy environment. Okay. For instance, collapsed buildings, sometimes you find that these collapsed buildings are built on waterways, right? So when the flood comes, it carries the building. And so that segues me into talking about people, when you talk about sustainability, people should not build in, flood channels. Because if you build in flood channels, you block the channels, which backs up, causes flooding, and then destroys things. Number one. Number two, you're talking about sustainability. The government has put in place measures for proper waste management, proper channeling of water and...
Honorable Commissioner, yes. We'll look at that angle of the policies of government when we come back from this short break. Stay with us as we continue to look at Anambra and Sustainable Environment Initiative. Stay with us. It's the weekend show and we're looking at Anambra and Sustainable Environment Initiative. Before we went on that short break, the Commissioner was telling us the policies of government as far as the environment is concerned. Honorable Commissioner.
So I was saying that, the environment has to do with building properly, managing waste properly, standard practices in road construction so that drainages are terminated properly, and then shift in behavioral attitude of people. People understanding how to actually behave so you don't dump waste into the gutters and drainages. So the policies of the state has been strengthened in the area of design, building construction, waste management, ecology, which is also dealing with erosions, and then, of course, beautification, because if you beautify, you hold, if you see what we're doing in beautification, we're holding the soil by introducing more grass, reducing the amount of concrete that you do, because if you put a lot of concrete, it stops water seepage. All these things, the policies have been strengthened in all these areas to make for better environment. How do you emit gas? Because that's another major problem, that is depleting the ozone layer. So, we're talking about climate change, sustainability, in the environment, and so on. So all
yes,
this
because when you talk about that gas issue, with the rate of foreign direct investments we're having in Anambra of recent, I think, what are you doing in that aspect to ensure that people who engage in manufacturing activities still meet the standard regulations in those aspects?
In fact, that's the whole aspect of, or the whole great thing about His Excellency's structure. You have the agency that's called Anambra State Investment Promotions and Protection Agency, which is a one-stop shop for people investing. Okay. When you go through them, they give you the lowdown on the government expectations. So, you know, ordinarily when people set up, you don't know what they're doing. But if you go through this agency, they of course make sure that you follow the standards. But one of the more important things that His Excellency Chief Dr. Willie Obiano is doing, we are aiming and we are achieving to do what we call industrial clusters. If you have an industrial cluster, you make sure that everything in that industrial cluster is done properly, so that it will be almost like plug and play. You know, people come in and they plug into it because you have done some standards.
And those places should be a little bit removed from residential.
And then because we're doing it that way, you have proper locations, not like what we're going through recently, where people are putting gas plants everywhere, posing danger to people. But that's another topic. So we're dealing with it. Yeah.
But even before then, before this, industrial clusters come to place, how is government? They are given the lay-down procedures, but how does government monitor to ensure that those regulations or those procedures that have been given are followed strictly?
Okay, and so that's why maybe I should also now address the audience in this. There's something we call environment impact assessment. So sometimes people see these things as nuisance. You know, you see professionals coming to your establishment before you establish an industry, before you establish a business that would otherwise impact the environment. We require you from Ministry of Environment to do what we call environmental impact assessment. So based on assessment report, based on that report, we will determine what you are about to do. What will it do to the masses and the environment? And then if we find that it will be detrimental, we suggest ways that you will abate that, or even stop or reject that establishment. So enforcement of environmental impact assessment, and what we also call gaseous emission things, where we also have people coming around. Now, granted, there are some rogues out there who are messing up these things, but I, as a Commissioner for Environment, trying to make sure that this, because it's a very serious business. You ask what we're doing, and I'm telling you that we are making sure that before you establish businesses, and mostly manufacturing, that we do environmental impact assessment and enforce it.
So I want to ask you a question that might be in the mind of a common man. Now, as a common man, how do I know an illegal building? You know, as a common man, when I walk through the streets, all I see is buildings. All I see is a house. But recently, I got to know that there are rules to how you build a house. There's something about how you measure away from the road.
The road, yes.
So, as a common man, are there rules or are there signs I would see and I will know this building is illegal, I should report it?
Okay, great question. But some of these things are very glaring, you know. Okay. The glaring ones where you see that somebody had, you know, blocked drainage, okay? You know, the rules are that there's what we call right of way. Proper setbacks on the road. They have different measures depending on the type of road that you're doing. Okay. If you have the expressway, you know, maybe 50 meters. In fact, if you look at our expressway now in Oka, look at ABS building, look at the banks. These are proper setbacks. Every public building that you see, you will see that these people adhere to standards. And that's how, you know, and all of a sudden somebody is building an eatery and he kicks out. I mean, if you look, there should be a very straight line. So when you look at these institutions, you see that they're the ones, because they know they understand the rules and they know not to cheat. But our people sometimes they want to get that little inch and then they mess up the system.
Okay, finally, before we go, I want you to advise our people, especially on this matter. You know, people will say, if I report now, it will be like I'm against his progress. How do we change that mindset?
Or ensure privacy.
Privacy. Advise people properly on that.
Well, we have to change that attitude. I don't even understand it. There's a man that I wish I could mention his name. I really applaud him. He was somebody that actually, probably single-handedly, made sure that he kept reporting this fuel station that is at Y Junction, Amobia bypass. Well, nobody knows, but he made sure that he kept reporting things that were waiting to happen and things that are happening. And then, of course, he kept me on my toes until we had that fuel station removed. Then another person that kept calling and letting us know that he knew that this building used to be a bungalow, and now that it's going up to like a 2-story building. Of course, I wouldn't have known that unless somebody had called. When we went there, it was true, and we put it down. So you don't have to take a bullhorn to do it. Go to the agencies, report, because it is your duty to save your neighborhood.
Thank you very much, Architect Michael Kompo, for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you.
Despite bringing you out on a Saturday morning. You know, it's not usually easy. But I know you're used to it. Yeah. When you led the cleaning of drainages some parts of Oka. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody. Please, let's work together to make our environment sustainable.
Yes, and I want to add my voice to that. Let's work together. When you see something, say something. Don't forget that when you say something, you are not just reporting a person, you are actually helping that person, and you're helping the entire society. All right, David, that's it from me.
Stay with us as we bring you the breakfast news at 8.